June. If you are here for this panel, unquestionably, you are here because this man has touched so many universes, both cult classic and hardcore franchise, obviously, and has created characters that are just beloved by, millions of people, unquestionably. And it goes from touching, Yoda to coming up with freaking crazy Jim Henson fever dream type stuff and making some of the best cult classics of all time. This guy has been behind so many of these characters you probably didn't even know he was behind, but they're still your favorite characters. And I am super excited to talk to him today here at Sinister Creature Con. Please welcome Mr. David Barclay. Hello, sir.
Good to see you again.
Yes.
Right. Hi, everyone.
We were just talking about before you walked in, you have been part of some of the most iconic franchises and some of the most iconic cult classics in film when it comes to, creature effects and puppetry and everything. And the names that you have worked with as far as puppet creature, special effects go, George Lucas and Jim Henson. I mean, those are two of the heaviest hitters there is.
Mm-hmm.
And we can dive in at any point in your career and probably have just the utmost awesome conversation about that movie. And I do want to, talk about some, obviously, but I'm just curious, you went on this career path that is just really amazing when you look at it on paper. You have been doing this for decades. I'm curious how you started. What was it?
Yes. How did I start? Well, I have the perfect excuse. My mum and dad were puppeteers.
Oh, nice.
They started off as actors, but they wanted to work together, and so they decided as a hobby to make a little puppet show for touring puppet show, and it exploded. They were very successful because they were very good actors, so they were very good with adapting the script to the crowd of the day. So every show was slightly different. It's based on the script, but they were able to ad-lib and change things around for different age groups and everything. So I grew up with them doing everything. They made their puppets, they designed them all. My father sculpted and painted them. My mother made the clothes. They did even the bookkeeping. They drove the van to the event and put the theatre up, did the show. They did all the characters, they did all the voices themselves, and then came home. And they did that for their entire lives. That became their entire career. And certainly when I was in my mid-teens, I'd been traveling with them since I was 6, puppeteering on their shows. I was the warm-up act. I would come up with my little toy string puppets and dance it to the music that was encouraging the audience to come and see the puppet show. So, but I wanted to be more into films. So I started making my own home movies.
Yeah.
I did a Dalek. I made a duplicate Dalek when I was about 14. Actual full-size Dalek, and we filmed a little bit of silly filmmaking with it. And then I then really got interested in the Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes, because it had just started showing on TV in the mid-70s. So I used all my puppet making knowledge, because my father had shown me how to make plaster molds and to do papier-mâché in those. But I put latex in there instead. And so I made my own rubber mask makeups from the Planet of the Apes and wigs and costumes. We filmed that. I was really interested in it. And so all of that was the understructure to what got me into the film industry, because I had these skills that I could offer when I had my first lucky break, which was meeting Stuart Freeborn. And Stuart was the makeup supervisor for all the Star Wars films. A brilliant man, genius makeup artist. He designed and sculpted Yoda and supervised the build of Jabba. He made Chewbacca, so all in the Star Wars world. But he did 2001: A Space Odyssey for Stanley Kubrick, and lots of makeups before. So he was an amazing guy. So, and he gave me my lucky break. So
That's really cool. I mean, you're talking about the iconic, characters that go within the Star Wars universe. This, he created essentially.
yeah.
That's a powerful resume for the Star Wars fandom when you say he created those characters, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was such a wonderful guy, very, very supportive, very creative. And I found out, actually not that, only a few years ago, that his parents said, "You're never being a makeup artist. Don't be stupid. Go and become a bricklayer or something." And he didn't want. No, I'm going to be a makeup artist. No, don't be silly. So he couldn't get any. He had no connections. He didn't know how to get into the industry. So he started doing test makeups on his own face, taking photographs and trying to get them around.
Yeah.
And I'd done the same thing. And so finally someone unearthed an old photograph of his that had a composite of like 6 or 7 different makeups. And we had done the same ones based on the old Universal monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein. Sure. And the Hunchback. And he'd done the same thing, and we both happened to be 19 at the same time. So when I showed him the photos, and I was 19, it probably reminded him when he was 19, because someone gave him a chance.
Yeah.
And so it's like, wow, strange coincidences. I had no idea at the time.
That's crazy, man. The Star Wars universe, the 2 characters that you are, infamous for being, really part of what makes them, because with a puppet, it's all about, how the character moves and interacts, obviously speaks, but, one thing I'll say about, characters in the Star Wars universe and Muppets too, is like their eyes. Their eyes bring a whole lot of life to it. So controlling the eyes, and the first one, Empire Strikes Back, you find yourself part of the team that is puppeteering, who up until The Mandalorian was the only big-eared green guy.
Yes.
Yoda, man, is if you're doing a Mount Rushmore, he's definitely on it. And so at the time, how was that journey in Empire Strikes Back?
Well, yeah, I got this lucky break, and I met Stuart Freeborn, and a week later he offered me a job working as a trainee in the makeup department, doing some run-of-the-mill jobs. One of the things with foam latex, it shrinks by 7%. And if you then have to put that on an underskull, which the foam latex sits on an underskull that has the eyes and everything, it's all a bit stretched. So you have to expand it. So, and it's just putting it into a chemical, washing it out, putting it through mangles, letting it dry. So lots of like mundane jobs. And I was doing various things. I sculpted a Noggard, a creature for the bog planet, made some duplicate mechanical parts, and was just under Stuart's tuition. But then one of the puppeteers on set, the Yoda had gone to set and was starting filming. One of the puppeteers on set became allergic to something, and they suddenly needed someone to fill in. Now, this is 1979, there are no mobile phones, and there's just no way of getting hold of anybody that quickly. Stuart knew I was a second-generation puppeteer, and he said, well, David can fill in. And so I was literally just immediately sent to set, given the hand control that I'd helped to create, because I was part of building the Yoda before it went to set, and got directions from Frank Oz. It's like so I didn't audition. I had no idea I was going to be doing it. It wasn't part of the original plan, and I didn't even have time to be nervous because I just had to get down there and do it. And so, if I'd been told the day before, I would have not slept. I would have been shaking. I couldn't have done the job, I don't think. So, but yes, I just turned up, and Frank told me what to do, and I thought, wow, I've had my one afternoon. Working Yoda's eyes. This is like on Star Wars. This is amazing. What I'm doing is actually going to be on the screen, not only some of the creation of Yoda, but actually puppeteering. But then the following morning, Frank said, no, I really like what you did. I want you to stay on doing Yoda's eyes. So from that point onwards, I wasn't doing the mundane jobs in the makeup department. I was one of the main puppeteers, one of the 4 main puppeteers on Yoda. So it's just like unbelievable. I look back at it and think, how lucky was I?
That's wild. When I made that eye comment, I had no idea that you were doing his eyes. So that's why. We go from Empire to the conclusion, which is, famous, probably the Cantina and then Jabba's Palace are the two most famous Star Wars like creature scenes. You could argue still to this day, but definitely for the the main trilogy. You get to find yourself as the chief puppeteer for Jabba.
Yeah.
This guy lives, through so many decades, so much so that anytime another Hutt makes an appearance in some kind of Lucasfilm property, cartoon or live action, people get really, really excited because it's that versatile memory to Jabba the Hutt. How was that, getting to be behind, also, were you the puppeteer that's responsible for Jabba licking Carrie Fisher?
Sadly, I wasn't the puppeteer responsible for licking Carrie Fisher. That was my very good friend Toby Philpott. Yes, because Toby and I had, after Empire, Toby and I were employed by Jim Henson on the Dark Crystal. So Toby only as a puppeteer performer. He was one of the Mystics and I think one of the Garthim. And helped Jim puppeteer Jen, who was one of the assistant puppeteers. But I was one of the puppet builders. I sculpted some of the characters and then went on and puppeteered in the actual shoot of Dark Crystal. And we had finished filming Dark Crystal when I got a call from Stuart Freeble asking me would I like to be chief puppeteer for Jabba. So again, I didn't audition. I didn't have to go through this whole round of, is he going to be better than this person? It was just offered to me.
Yeah.
And I said, but Stuart, I'm actually employed by Jim Henson right now.
Yeah.
So I better speak to Jim. Because I didn't want to just fire myself from Jim, I didn't want to just quit the job to go and do Star Wars. So I asked Jim, and Jim said, well, as long as I finished the work that I needed to do for promoting Dark Crystal, because that's what he was using me for at that time, he would release me for the Jabba days. So I got my cake and eat it. Not only was I being full-time employed by Jim Henson, only one of two puppet makers doing that, in London after Dark Crystal, I was also chief puppeteer for Jabba. And so they asked me who would I like to be as my co-pilot, as it were, my second puppeteer. And I said Toby, because I knew his father very well, who was also a puppeteer. He was another second-generation puppeteer. But we got on like a house on fire. We were great friends, and we were about the right same size. Because you needed two people of equal size inside Jabba's chest.
Right.
So I did the right hand with my three-fingered hand, with mechanical extensions on the fingers. With my left hand, I reached up under the throat into the mouth mechanism and controlled the jaw and the mouth. Toby, shoulder to shoulder me, next to me, he's doing the left hand and the head, and for that special shot, he put a glove on his hand, the glove was shaped like a tongue, and he just pushed it out through the mouth. So it was that simple. It wasn't any kind of clever mechanical thing. It was just clever use of puppeteered hand.
Wow. So it's a very practical tongue she's getting licked with.
Yes, yeah. But again, see, inside Jabba, we can't see anything out of the character, and we really can't hear very well. So we've got little earpieces that's sending in a radio signal. It's very tinny, very hard to hear. And the only way we can see, we've got little tiny, old-fashioned CRT TV monitors hung around our necks with a tiny, blurry picture of Jabba on.
So yeah, what is that picture like? Is that akin to like the camera shot, or is it just a focus on what Jabba looks like?
Well, originally it was, they tried putting it through the camera, but the image was so poor that we really couldn't see what we were doing. So they arranged for a video camera up in the lighting rig that was pointed down at us so we could see. Because I couldn't see what Toby was doing, because we couldn't see out, and he couldn't see what I was doing. So if we had to coordinate, the only way we could do it was looking at the monitor. And that's exactly how we'd learned to work all the creatures on Dark Crystal. So it was a known procedure. So it wasn't something we had to learn, something we brought to the character from having spent 6 months filming animatronics for Jim.
So, one thing in film school they teach you is quiet on set usually is like be super quiet on set because, so you guys are in Java. Is there some kind of like unspoken language when it comes to that stuff where you have to coordinate?
Well, when we're filming, yes. Typically what happens is I was doing the voice of Jabba on set. So this voice was coming out of a speaker next to Jabba so everyone could hear what he was saying. And I spoke in English, so all the cast and crew also knew what Jabba was saying. I don't think they'd finished working on the Huttese, so they had Bo Shooter. So I actually said Bo Shooter in my English-British voice.
Yeah.
But everything else was, when you read the subtitles, that's the actual words I'm saying.
Oh, nice.
So that I said those words when we were filming. And so typically, again, this was developed for Yoda and for Dark Crystal, and we used the same sort of approach, is that the chief puppeteer with the voice, everyone follows that rhythm. And we talk about it before we film, we rehearse, and we can block our ideas off set. But when we're on set, we'll do that. And often, if something's about to happen, you make a very loud, audible inhale. So everybody knows something's about to happen. Because if you're going to go, if you just do, everyone's behind. They don't know that you're going to say anything.
Yeah.
All the rest of the team, we had two puppeteers outside doing radio control for the eyes. So they're on Futaba joysticks doing eyes and eyebrows and expressions. And so we all had to work together. But again, we'd all been on Dark Crystal, so we'd all had that common experience. So
Yeah, that's one thing that I noticed that in watching, all those movies, kind of, again, getting ready to get to talk to you, is when you watch the credits, a lot of the same names appear, especially in the Jim Henson stuff. What was he like to be under in that team of all you guys? Like you mentioned, ILM has this really cool documentary out right now, Light and Magic, that covers, they're up to like the prequel trilogy right now, and it's cool to see those guys go through the practical set making to digital effects. And puppetry for you, it's kind of the same thing, because I know you've done animatronic work too.
Yeah.
So you've seen that similar evolution in your craft.
Yes.
So that's got to be pretty cool to be, working for Jim and now see where it is today. But first, what was Jim Henson like?
Well, Jim he truly was the visionary and the delightful gentleman that he is. Most people describe him. And so I know that firsthand, because when I first got to the Creature Shop, I just finished working with Frank Oz on Empire. And so Frank said, well, we've got this movie, Dark Crystal, that Jim and I are going to direct, so please come along and be part of it. Yeah. So again, I didn't have to audition. I just turned up and they gave me a job. So, but I was the very first British puppet maker. They had spent about, I think, some months or years, perhaps even, in New York doing some early research and development for how could we build these characters for this film. And they had finally set up a workshop in Hampstead in London, and they were looking to actually get a crew of puppet builders and engineers and artists to develop what became animatronics. No one really had done this before, and certainly not for the performance. Yoda really was the first. Yeah. And so in 1979 I joined that team. And being the first British puppet maker there, I was often the first person in the building. They gave me the front door key. I'd come in, I'd put the coffee on for everyone else. And one morning Jim came in. I had briefly met him on Empire, because they did a little gag when we'd filming Yoda, and the crews, because Yoda's a heavy puppet, in between takes, Frank would take his arm down and get the blood back in his arm and then put Yoda back up. He takes his arm down, and then they say, right, let's roll film, and then Miss Piggy and Kermit pop up, and the whole crew go nuts. They just, because we were working hard, we were slightly behind schedule at that time, and it was like we were doing some really tough work, and this just broke the ice. Everyone was loving it, so I got to meet him briefly then. So I think he'd seen my face and knew I was coming to the workshop. But the very first time I met him at the Creature Shop, he came in through the front door and he said, "Good morning, sir." And it was just so respectful. He set up a unique environment where all the artists would thrive. He really made sure that you could do your best work, and everybody wanted to do their very best for Jim. Yeah. And he didn't do it through bullying. He did it through just sheer positive and just genius leadership. He was just, that experience, the Dark Crystal particularly, was like no other experience. I was thinking, oh, well, if all films are like this is fantastic. But no, it was just uniquely Jim. And he was so far ahead of his thinking. When we finished filming Dark Crystal, he asked myself and Lyle Conway to stay on when everyone was let go. There was about 500 people on the crew for doing Dark Crystal, and so we were felt very privileged to be the only two puppet builders that he kept on after the film wrapped. And I remember talking to him about, he had a vision for doing a computer graphics TV show. So he was already thinking that way in the early 80s, and he said the original plan was they would build puppets that would look like CG, typical CG animation, and they'd use chroma key backgrounds from computer. And then when the technology got good enough, they'd use digital puppets. And that took about 25 years until that really was working. Yeah. So he was so far ahead of his time. And again, like Labyrinth, at the time it was a box office failure, which is a real shame. It really broke Jim's heart. But that's because, in my opinion, it was a film that was, again, breaking new ground. We had the hero was a teenage girl, and that was like, oh no, you can't do that.
Yeah. And
it was all the fantasy, it was all the puppet stuff, David Bowie, and of course the middle-aged white guys that were reviewing the film said, oh, this is terrible. It wasn't for them, you know.
Right, yeah.
So, so I'm so glad it's got such a huge following these days, and so it touched so many people's lives. It just didn't happen while Jim was alive.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that movie too is like the Bizarro of Muppets, because you have the creatures of Labyrinth look nothing like the Muppets.
No.
And the Muppets, I mean, there's tons of adult humor within the Muppets, but they're never like upfront about it.
Yeah.
In the Labyrinth, there, some of the monsters in there, and the Goblin King, like Bowie, is kind of an ass.
Yes, yeah.
So to see Henson make a movie, that the story is literally like the Goblin King's keeping Toby forever.
Yeah.
If she can't solve the labyrinth by this time.
Yes.
It's cool to get to see that side of him and see that kind of creature creation and everything. And you got to play a couple of cool creatures.
Yeah. Sir Didymus. Yeah.
Sir Didymus, and then
the Worm, and then we also did the Fireys. I was Fiery 1.
And that was like the Jim Henson Muppet moment of Labyrinth. Is the Fireys where they do your dance. So you got to do both. That's cool.
Yeah, and again, my friend Toby Philpott, who was next to me that I chose inside Jabba, Toby and I worked on the same Fiery. So again, we end up getting teamed up because we've worked together on lots of films. And yeah, when I was like supervising movies and supervising productions, I was able to get like Toby, oh, come on, Toby, let's do, Little Shop of Horrors, let's go and do Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
So one film, I mean, I got Star Wars tattoos all over my leg and everything, so I could talk to you about Star Wars all day, but I know one film you were on that is a yearly tradition for me and people of the channel. I saw your name on the credits as part of Muppets Christmas Carol.
Yes.
What did you do on that one?
Well, the way I've always worked with Muppets, even before that, because sadly Jim had passed at that point. Jim had died before, and that was the first big project actually since Jim had left this world. So, and so while we were filming Labyrinth, there was some Muppet shoots that they were doing, I think called Little Muppet Monsters, I think, and so. So Jim Henson, Frank Oz, Dave Goles, the three main leads, they were doing some little shoot to tie some scenes together that had been already filmed in California, I think. And so Mike Quinn and myself, we came in to help out because we'd been performing Sprocket the Dog on Fraggle Rock for the international co-production. So we were like technically Muppet performers. And so we came in. So in that instance, when Frank had Fozzie Bear and Miss Piggy, two characters that he does, he can't do two characters at once. So he will do the most prominent one, and then I filled in for the other ones. I did all the mouth movements, but silently. Sometimes Frank would say the lines of this character at the same time, and I just lip sync along to them, and so that was often the way it worked for me. I wasn't one of the lead Muppet performers, so I didn't have my own character, but I actually doubled for every single character on the Muppets over the years. And one of the fun things was I was able to perform Sprocket the dog in Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh,
so
nice.
that's mine. I got to do penguins, and I got to do the rats, and I got to double for Kermit the Frog.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I was there every single day. So it was just like it was a delight.
One thing that Henson does too that's really prominent within all the puppet, the creations that you guys do, is it makes the characters like the penguins or the rats or anything. Like, people automatically, I think, when they know Muppet Penguin, like the picture of a Muppet Penguin comes to mind.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
they do a really good job at making those side characters like their own little cult followings and stuff. It's cool.
Yeah. No, and again, some of those early Muppet designs were from the early days in more like Sesame Street times, and one of the main geniuses behind the early Muppets and Sesame was a guy called Don Celine, and he was just brilliant. And so Jim had already created the original Kermit. He made that himself, Jim Henson. But when it came to, I think, expanding and probably around Sesame Street, they wanted to sort of just enhance him and make him better. And Don Celine did that. He made the Kermit basically that we all know and love, and made so many of the other characters. So he was a really important part of the early Muppets that really no one ever knows about.
Yeah, the one more I saw your name attached to that, I was like, dang, teenage me, man. Team America, World
Team
Police.
America, yes.
Holy smokes, when that movie came out, like Trey Parker and Matt Stone, like my generation, South Park.
Yes.
Like, so we're signed up to go buy a ticket to whatever they make.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
yeah, you weren't expecting that. No, I don't think any of us were quite expecting that. So
what was that set like?
it was just there's an awful lot of work. It really was. It was very, very hard work because Trey and Matt wanted the least amount of strings on the puppets for every shot. So every once in a while there'd just be 2 strings going to the head, and that would be it. There'd be nothing else. And trying to get the puppets to do what the script was telling. They had little triggers, which were like radio controlled to the lower lip of the marionettes that the puppeteers were performing. So they made up the script as they went along, and they often ad-libbed and changed it on the fly. So the 2 of them would have each one of these things, and so the puppets would say things, and the puppeteers go, "Whoa, okay," so having to follow along. So it was an amazing experience. It was they had loads and loads of very, very talented marionettists, Tony Urbano, Greg Ballora, loads of the great puppeteers in Los Angeles. And I think most of them didn't know that I had done marionettes.
Yeah.
And that's where I started with my parents. So, and I hadn't actually puppeteered marionettes for probably about 20 years. And so they put one in my hand, and everyone thinks, what's Dave Barclay doing? He doesn't do that. He does Muppets and he does engineering. What's he doing with string puppets? And then, of course, I picked it up and I walked it along perfectly. And they, so it made everyone sort of, oh, he does that as well, does he? So
Well, that's part of the charm of the movie too, is like seeing the strings and like.
I think so. I don't think they should have worried about the strings myself, but that was their thing. So, and so because of that, it takes a while to change the strings. Sometimes they're 20 feet long, sometimes they're 5 feet long, depending on where you are in the set. Because I created this string puppet version of Sir Didymus for Labyrinth. And what I did is I created a brand new spool system at the back, where all the strings came up onto the marionette control, and then with little cables went up to the spool system, so you could just change the height of the marionette at any time, because I knew probably every single shot would be a different height. And that can take you an hour to restring it. Yeah. And I knew there wasn't that time, so I came up with this system. So within like a minute, it's a different height, and off we go again. So, but they didn't do that. So they actually had a team of the puppet builders working through the night. They had a night team where when filming finished at the end of the evening at 8 or 9 o'clock. They had a team come in, and they spent the entire evening restringing the puppets ready for the next morning.
Jeez. Man. My last question before we open it up, you've from Lucas and Henson all the way to Parker and Stone, like, you really had, man, like a Hall of Fame career as far as creature creation and puppetry, at least in my opinion. It is an honor to meet you, and I'm just curious, kind of like, I know you have your autobiography out there at your table.
We've just sold out.
Oh wow, you did. Well,
We've just sold out. It's like, yeah.
Well,
we thought we brought enough, but everyone's been,
Well, that is awesome. You
Yeah.
guys can probably find copies of it online.
Online, yes, either on my website or coolwatersproductions.com. So I'm davebarclay.com is my name.
But what do you kind of hope your stamp on the whole thing is? Like, if you were going to sum it all up, when people kind of look at your career, what do you kind of hope that you brought to, creature creation, puppetry as a whole, and, kind of guide the next, evolution towards it?
Well, I mean, I started off being really passionate with the puppetry, the sort of puppetry that my parents did, and then decided, I don't want to do that in my teenage years, and got into movies. And having been so lucky to start with the first animatronic puppet, Yoda, got to see the real focus of acting, really taking the acting, because a lot of the British puppet live shows that my parents were friends with, not great acting, just a bit of fun, Punch and Judy, that sort of thing. But Yoda, he had to have every thought in his head. You needed to be able to read what that was.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of subtle head movements, timing, maybe a little vocal thing. And so for me, it was about the character, bringing the character to life. And everything I've done when I build a puppet, I read the script and think, right, how are we going to make this puppet? How is it going to be able to deliver the emotional performance that this script requires? So I almost never build a puppet the same way twice, because the character is different each time. So it will require a different mechanism, a different way of making the expressions work. And then we work very hard, often a team of 6 puppeteers, trying to get one character together. And if we get it together and it works, it's a true joy. So I just hope that people enjoy the performances of the characters, and I've been able to do sort of hundreds of different characters and it's all me, so it's just wonderful. Like from Jabba to Yoda, it's like from bad to evil, from Sprocket the dog who doesn't speak to Wile E. Coyote who doesn't speak. I just did Coyote, and it just brings me great joy, and I hope it's entertained everyone else too.
Right on, man. Does anybody have a question for Dave? Yeah, Xander, go ahead.
Growing up with the marionette puppets, were you inspired by the show Thunderbird?
I was, yes. That really was my time. And so before there, I think it was Four Feather Falls was the very first thing. Then it was like Thundercar, Fireball XL5, and then Thunderbirds was really the big one. But it's all Jerry Anderson, and also just amazing miniature effects, just fantastic miniature effects. And Derek Meddings was the guy who was behind all that, all the little miniatures, the cars, all the sets. And I got to work with Derek many years later, which was great, because I was just a kid when they were doing that. So, but also that string puppets were kind of the traditional marionette style that a lot of British puppeteers used in performance. There was the traditional Punch and Judy, which were glove puppets, but there was a lot of marionettes doing cabaret shows, people walking around with them. So it was, I found it interesting because it was a full puppet, and I started making my own, carving the legs and working out how to do all that, sculpting heads. I had a Michael Jackson puppet that would dance to the Jackson 5 songs when I take my puppets to school. So it was, I loved working out how to actually bring them to life. And but yeah, I got to meet probably one of the world's most renowned marionette builders and performers, a German guy called Albrecht Roser. And he was reckoned as one of the greatest puppeteers and marionettist people ever. And Jim Henson arranged for me to go and stay with him. And we got on really, really well. He was a genius. And he said, well, it'll take you at least a year to make a good marionette because you're going to rebuild it for a year until it's right. And so that was the level of dedication. He would make it, no, it's not right, try it again. He would just keep working until it was flawless. And his puppets, they would almost work themselves, you know, they were so beautifully made. And so, yeah, it was really great to meet him and just get that insight into this true art form that is very rarely observed these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have any projects coming up that you can talk about that anyone we should be keeping an eye out for?
Yes, the most recent film that I completed is hopefully coming out next year. It's called Coyote versus Acme. And although there's no mention of me, I was Coyote as a full-sized animatronic puppet on set as reference. Now they are going to they have digitally removed me and the puppet and added proper Warner Brothers style animation into the movie. But when they started to come up with the film, producer Christofaria was talking to the other producers, and they say, well, Wile E. Coyote doesn't speak. This is a live-action film like Roger Rabbit. We can't have a voice actor doing the lines for everyone to work and get all the rhythms and all that, because he doesn't speak. How are you going to do it? And my producer friend, Chris Defaria, says, I have the perfect solution. It's called Dave Barclay. And so he got me to build a Wile E. Coyote puppet. His ears go to 5'4" tall, so he's quite large. And I mechanized so his cheeks could go into a frown, his eyes could go into a frown. He could smile, his eyes could go sad. So I could actually physically make the face act in front of the actors. So if they asked him, he could go, oh. And then, because I could do the hand as well, so I could make all that work for them, so that they could watch them. And the animators were saying that they used all the my performance points for their animation reference. So it was a joy. It was a real joy. So so that's coming out next year.
That's awesome to hear. I know there's been kind of some back and forth of whether or not they were gonna.
Yeah. Well, Warner's decided just to axe it for tax purposes.
Hi, Little Shop of Horrors is one of my favorite films of all time, and I would love to hear more about your experience working on that.
Right. Well, my main experience was doing the lower lip for that, like Audrey 2, and that was two big levers. So I was primarily, I just finished working for Jim Henson at the Creature Shop from '79 till we did that in '86. And I decided I just wanted a break. I didn't want to go back into the workshop for a little while. I just wanted to be a puppeteer. And Frank offered me the job for doing the lower lip, so that's what I said, yeah, I'll just do the puppeteer. And there was months of rehearsal, so we would go in and we would work out trying to get the lip sync perfectly. I was working with Mike Quinn, who we, a couple of years later, set up our own animatronic company. But we were working together, we got on very well. And so he was doing the upper lip, I was doing the lower lip. So, but at one point, Lyle Conway, who is the animatronic supervisor, who did an amazing job on Little Shop. I mean, it's some of the best animatronics, I think, still out there. And so he said that they needed one hand puppet version of Audrey 2. All the others were cable mechanized versions or mechanical levers. But they needed one hand puppet version because had to grab hold of Seymour's finger, Rick Moranis, and pull it around. And there was no way they could get a mechanical device to do that safely. A hand, obviously, you can feel it and work at it.
Right.
And he said he didn't really have any true puppet makers. And I'd spent years working with him on Dark Crystal and Labyrinth and all that time. And so he said, would I make this puppet for the Some Fun Now sequence? And I said, yeah, sure. So I came in about 3 hours early in the morning, did 3 hours, and then did the rehearsal for the day, doing the big plant. And at the end of the day, I stayed another 3 hours, and I did that as a free gift. So and I made the puppet, and then but because I had to do all of this stuff, it was built around my hand, so I was the only one who could operate it. So I got to puppeteer that one myself, and at the end of the shoot, Frank Oz and Lyle Conway gifted me that puppet, which I have to this day.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Guys, we are unfortunately out of time, but we could definitely listen to stories from you all day, man. Make sure you look up his book, and you can read those
There's
stories.
some of those, some more stories. Yeah.
But Dave, man, thank you so much for sharing them today.
No, thank you. Great. Thank you, guys.